No, I think it's okay. English? Inglés? Okay. Y si hay una pregunta especial en castellano, no hay problema. Okay. Pero with the video, it's a little bit better in English because the spread is better. So, welcome for this press meeting with Ambassador Pedro Luis Pedroso Cuesta about the US policy towards Cuba. I think the news from Venezuela are especially interesting today because this country is also confronted to the same problem of sanctions and so by the US authorities. So, Mr. Ambassador, we have the pleasure to hear you. And before to give you the floor, I would like to offer you a small gift from cartoons and also a magazine with una personalidad muy conocida en Cuba, que es de frente. Voilà. Voilà. I would like also to ask you to sign our golden book. Just here. Thank you, muchas gracias, and I give you the floor. Good.
Good afternoon to all. First of all, I want to sincerely appreciate and thank Guy Metten for having organized this press conference. I also want to thank you, members of the press, for being here with us this afternoon, but also to colleagues, ambassadors, and friends of Cuba. I can identify members of the Swiss-Cuba Association and other friends of the Cuban mission. Thanks to all for coming. We really felt that it was extremely important to try to have an encounter with the press here in Geneva. Geneva is called the city of peace, and there are many reasons for that. And the main reason for us having called for this press conference is the latest US decision on Cuba, decisions by the administration of President Trump himself, that since arrival to the White House has decided to step back from important progress that we have made during the latest administration, the Obama presidency. Which are the latest decisions of the US government on Cuba? Well, first of all, last April 17, the president himself decided to go ahead and allow actions to be taken in US courts against Cuban and foreign entities for investing in what they consider confiscated property in Cuba. Second, they decided to harden impediments to enter in the United States by chief executive and their families who have decided to invest in Cuban company, investment which are legitimate. I want to call your attention that all these actions have been contemplated in the Helms-Burton law adopted in 1996 under the Clinton administration. The Helms-Burton law is composed of various titles. This one, Title 3, even if President Clinton himself promulgated this legislation, decided to waive implementation on this particular chapter and also in Chapter 4 of the legislation because of the tremendous juridical implications for the U.S. of going ahead with implementation of these actions. First of all, because of the extraterritorial nature of the legislation, which means to extend U.S. law to third countries and to third country companies and to third country citizens, people who are not entitled or are not bound by U.S. law. So since President Clinton, till now, including President Trump himself, during his first 2 years of mandate, decided to waive this particular piece of the Helms-Burton law. But now they decided to go ahead. And I guess that you have got reactions from all over the world, including the European Union and member countries of the European Union in their national capacity reacting against this. In addition to the decision to go ahead with Title III, President Trump also decided to reinstate limits on remittances that Cuban residents in the U.S. send to their families and friends in Cuba, and further restrict travel by U.S. citizens to Cuba, and impose additional financial sanctions. And I want you to bear with me because I think we need to stop a little bit to explain this. First, restriction on remittances to Cuban families not only hurt the interest and income of each family that has those ties, but it also harms the freedom and the right of the people in the United States to send remittances to relatives or friends in Cuba, and will greatly damage the self-employed sector of the Cuban economy. More obstacles to U.S. citizens to travel to Cuba, which is not only contrary to the Constitution of the United States, because it violates one of the bases of the U.S. Constitution, which is the right of American people to travel freely to everywhere in the world. So they have decided this to cut it short from progress that we have made during the Obama administration that had decided to widen the category of licenses under which American citizens could travel to Cuba, not on tourism purposes, but certainly to travel under people-to-people programs, and there was a whole facilitation on that. This brings those that progress back again. This law, together with the specific actions that are now announced, will deepen the economic, commercial, and financial blockade imposed by the U.S. government against the people of Cuba for almost 60 years. This is the longest blockade on earth. There is no other people on earth that have resisted such coercive measures and policies like the Cuban people for over 60 years, for the whole purpose, or for the sole purpose of stifle the economy and punish the Cuban people as a whole. This is the policy that has been rejected by the General Assembly for 27 consecutive years. I have here the latest resolution adopted by the General Assembly, which is titled Necessity of Ending the Economic, Commercial, and Financial Embargo imposed by the United States of America against Cuba. And the resolution starts saying, determined to encourage strict compliance with the purposes and principles enshrined in the Charter of the United Nations, which in other words means that the U.S. policy towards Cuba is in flagrant contradiction with the purposes and principles enshrined in the Charter of the United Nations. It further goes to say reaffirming, among other principles, the sovereign equality of states, non-intervention and non-interference in their internal affairs, and freedom of international trade and navigation, which are also enshrined in many international legal instruments. Concern about the continued promulgation and application by member states of laws and regulations, such as that promulgated on 12 March 1996, known as the Helms-Burton Act, the extraterritorial effects of which affect the sovereignty of other states, the legitimate interests of entities or persons under their jurisdiction, and the freedom of trade and navigation, and express the rejection by the international community and public opinion of the promulgation and application of measures of the kind referred to above. It goes to say also, after mentioning the previous resolutions, and concerned also about the adverse effects of such measures on the Cuban people and on the Cuban nationals living in other countries. Reiterate to all its call upon all states to refrain from promulgating and applying laws and measures of the kind referred to in conformity with their obligations under the Charter of the United Nations and international law. And this is basically a text that the General Assembly, the highest body of the international community, have been adopting for the last 27 years. So, which is, if somebody have to be appointed or signal as a pariah government, who is that one? I think it's very much clear. If somebody have to be signal of acting in total disrespect with international law, I think is clear. Because this is a call by the international community for the last 27 years. And still, the U.S. is respect not only the call by the international community, but continue to go ahead in trying to squeeze even further and to strangle the Cuban economy and by extension, the Cuban people. But this is not new. This is a policy that you all know started since the very beginning of the revolution. And I would like to bring, because it's not only clear for the purpose of the latest action of the U.S. government on Cuba, but also is very clear with the actions undertaken particularly by the Trump administration regarding other countries that have decided just not to follow the U.S. dictates. In April 6, 1960, the then U.S. Undersecretary of State Lester Mallory, in writing a memorandum to the U.S. President, affirmed the following: the only means for the Cuban people to stop supporting their government, and I quote, is to provoke disappointment and discouragement through the economic dissatisfaction and hardship. And for that, they had to quickly put into practice everything that would weaken the Cuban economy and the life of the Cuban people in order to provoke hunger, despair, and on the end, to provoke the overthrow of the government. But it's not that similar what is going on with Venezuela today? I mean, and this is regardless of ideologies and political viewpoint. It's a question of rationale. It's the same policy that the U.S. is trying to implement today with Venezuela. Just robbing and stealing Venezuela's resources to provoke despair, to provoke the fatigue of the people, and on the end, to provoke that the people withdraw its support to the legitimate government. As we're meeting here, there has been another coup d'etat attempt in Venezuela today. And I call on you that you are the press, and this is because usually we have been portrayed in one way toward the press by those who pretend to be the word of the free press. And those are now talking too much about fake news, and I just appeal to you because I really and sincerely think that there is a responsibility. We are coming from a very terrible past in our region, in Latin America and the Caribbean. We are coming from a past of very dramatic and dark dictatorships, of fascist regimes. That is the past that the US is trying we go back. And that is what they're promoting with all these policies, particularly in a region that has lived without war and at peace for the last 50 years, unless interventions by the US. But the Latin American countries have not been at war with themselves like had happened in many other regions of the world. Latin America is one of the first regions in the world that declared itself free of nuclear weapons. It decided to proclaim itself in the second summit of the Latin American Caribbean states CELAC in Havana as a region of peace. But it seems to be a region of peace does not produce enough political dividends to those who are very much interested in the practice of divide to conquer. So which is the position of the Cuban government and people regarding the latest reaction or the latest actions by the US administration? Well, first of all, we reject in the strongest sense the policy or the actions decided by the US administration. We will continue to guarantee the legal conditions and honor the commitments of the Cuban government regarding foreign investors and our economic partners in Cuba. The course already undertaken since quite a number of years now of rapprochement and extension of the links between the nation and the Cubans living in other countries, including those living in the US, will be maintained. Seeking ways to overcome obstacles, to bring them closer to the homeland, to prevent that the actions of a hostile, arrogant, and irrespectful government obstruct the link between our nationals, and will continue to open spaces for communication and exchange with US citizens and institutions, including academia, cultural, and scientific sectors. Likewise, the engagement will continue with all who have promoted commercial interests and have established lines of economic and commercial exchange of mutual benefit, whether they are residents of the United States or anywhere in the world. Despite these measures, the United States will not be able to move an inch in the firm determination of Cuba, nor will it achieve the old desire of overthrowing the Cuban Revolution and controlling the destinies of Cuba. Our former president, Army General Raúl Castro, recalled all of us last April 10th, the date in which we enacted the new Constitution of Cuba, and I quote, "Over 60 years, facing aggression and threats, Cubans have shown the iron will to resist and overcome the most difficult circumstances. Despite its immense power, imperialism does not possess the capacity to break the dignity of a united people, proud of its history and of the freedom conquered with so much sacrifice." And I really believe that Raúl summarized, like Fidel would have done it, what is the spirit and the will of our people. To us, it is imperative to stop this folly and irresponsibility and stop this dangerous collection for the good not only of the people of Cuba and the people of the US, but also for the people of the entire region and by extension of the entire planet. The world cannot afford to remain impassive while it is summed up to destroy countries with impunity, as it has happened in other regions of the planet and it is happening today. Cubans trust in the force of truth, of law, and of justice. We appeal to governments, parliaments, political forces, social, popular, indigenous movement representatives of civil society, intellectuals, academicians, scientists, journalists, intellectuals. We await the action by the General Assembly next fall. I thank you very much for your attendance and your attention. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Ambassador, for this presentation and statement. Now I would like to open the floor maybe to questions from the media. Yes, please. Just push the button. Yeah, please. Yeah. Okay.
Hello. May I do the question in Spanish?
Okay.
Yeah. Ok, buenas tardes. Soy Antonio Broto de la agencia EFE. Permítame preguntarle por la situación en Venezuela, que es un tema de gran importancia hoy. ¿Cree usted que Estados Unidos está implicado en los acontecimientos que hoy están ocurriendo en Venezuela o que podría implicarse en las próximas horas? Y cualquier otra valoración que pueda hacer de los sucesos, pues se la agradeceríamos.
Gracias, Andrea. Yo en realidad preferiría que me preguntaras sobre Cuba y de la política de los Estados Unidos sobre Cuba. Pero ya que me preguntas, yo creo que la historia habla por sí sola. O sea, no Cuba. New York Times ha reconocido que los Estados Unidos estuvieron implicados en el anterior intento de golpe de Estado en Venezuela. New York Times reconoció que Estados Unidos estuvo implicado en el ataque con drones. E incluso la cadena CNN ha demostrado que lo del 23 de febrero pasado fue toda una falsa montada por el imperio. Entonces, no sé, no tengo obviamente las evidencias, pero creo que este es un gobierno que como ningún otro ha utilizado y utiliza la mentira de una manera raya con la morbosidad, la manera en que este gobierno usa la mentira y el chantaje. No me extrañaría. No tengo las evidencias, no lo puedo afirmar categóricamente, pero creo que la historia de nuestra región, nuestra propia historia, la de Cuba, se está estrenando un documental en estos días sobre la explosión de la Cubre en La Habana. El barco La Cubre. Se está estrenando justamente por estos días. Que por cierto, tuvo financiamiento de algunos amigos suizos para su producción. La historia de la cubre estuvo basada en una gran mentira. O sea, y era una embarcación norteamericana que ellos mismos, que venía con armas, incluso no venían ni de la Unión Soviética, venían de Europa Occidental, cuando triunfó la revolución. Los Estados Unidos pintó con insignias de la fuerza, de la incipiente Fuerza Aérea Revolucionaria, los aviones norteamericanos en el preludio de Playa Girón. Falso. Eran aviones norteamericanos. Pero tenían la necesidad de dar la impresión de que eran las propias fuerzas revolucionarias sublevadas o en desacuerdo con Fidel. Entonces, la historia de América Latina está plagada del uso de la mentira por parte de los Estados Unidos para alcanzar sus propósitos. Por tanto, no me extrañaría nada, porque además ninguno de esos personajes, que por cierto la intentona todo parece indicar que está bajo absoluto control, no podía ser de otra manera, porque la inmensidad de la Fuerza Armada venezolana ha reiterado su apoyo al gobierno legítimo y a la Constitución de Venezuela, está controlada. Y según los medios de prensa, eran unos 4 o 5 gatos. Pero enseguida empezaron a reaccionar por la social media para dar la impresión de que el gobierno se había venido abajo. Yo lo dejo ahí, francamente no te puedo decir más, reitero, no tengo las evidencias, pero no me extrañaría absolutamente nada.
Another question or pregunta? Sí. Okay.
Well, coming back to Cuba, we have 27 resolutions of the General Assembly condemning what the U.S. calls embargo, what Cubans call the bloqueo, and bloqueo is more accurate than embargo. As the case may be, there are proven violations by the United States of the United Nations Charter, of its erga omnes obligations vis-a-vis the world community. And of course, a resolution of the General Assembly doesn't have any teeth. And I think it is time for the sanctions regime as such, the sanctions regime against Cuba, of course also against Venezuela and other countries, to be brought to the International Criminal Court under Article 7 of the Rome Statute, because it's been demonstrated that sanctions kill. When in Cuba, there is difficulty in obtaining dialysis equipment. Because of the embargo, certain medicines are difficult to obtain. Same situation in Venezuela today. People die. And there's no body count. There has not been a clear estimate of the number of human victims in Cuba, in Nicaragua, in Venezuela. Last week, Professor Jeffrey Sachs and Dr. Mark Weisbrot of the Center of Research in Washington published a paper quantifying the deaths in Venezuela, not in Cuba, at 40,000. Deaths directly resulting from the sanctions regime imposed by the United States. Now, that has definitely reached the threshold of what a crime against humanity is for purposes of the ICC statute. And any country could ask the prosecutor of the International Criminal Court to start an investigation on the illegality of these sanctions. Cuba could start that kind of request for an investigation. Of course, Venezuela could too. The non-aligned movement could too. The Group of 77 could also do that. Another avenue would be to use the possibility through the General Assembly, the same as Cuba gets for 27 years in a row, gets a resolution adopted by the GA. Why not a resolution by the GA elevating the legal question of the sanctions to the International Court of Justice in order to obtain an advisory opinion that should say this kind of economic sanctions kills, this kind of economic sanctions is contrary to the United Nations Charter, is contrary to the Charter of the Organization of American States. A third avenue that no one has used thus far, you may or may not know that the Human Rights Committee, and I used to be secretary of the Human Rights Committee, under the International Covenant on Civil and Political Rights, has a provision under Article 41 that opens the possibility for all states parties to the Covenant on Civil and Political Rights to present an interstate complaint. The United States, remarkably enough, has accepted the competence of the Human Rights Committee to look at interstate complaints against the United States. And it would be entirely possible for Russia, for Algeria, for any number of countries that similarly have given the declaration under Article 41 to present an interstate complaint before the Human Rights Committee under Article 6, which is right to life. Sanctions have caused death. Therefore, sanctions have caused death in Cuba. I don't know. My question to you, has UNICEF or any other agency in Cuba estimated the number of persons who have lost their lives directly or indirectly as a result of sanctions? I mean, an answer to that question I'm quite interested in having, but if you quantify the number of deaths, then you have a legal basis to go to the International Criminal Court and to ask accountability from the United States and from all countries that connive in the sanctions, all the other countries that also impose sanctions, meaning Canada, the United Kingdom, etc. So to the extent that there are massive violations of international law, I mean, international law has not been abrogated by the United States by its action. What has happened is that we have a situation of total impunity. Thus far, the United States has not been called to account. But returning to my question, has anybody estimated the link between the blockade, the bloqueo, the financial sanctions, and other economic sanctions, and increased maternal mortality, increased infant mortality, etc., in Cuba, or for that matter, in Venezuela?
Thank you, Alfred, for your multiple questions. It's a long question within a question, but anyway, it's true. It's true that the General Assembly resolution does not have any teeth, but it still convey the power of the will of the international community. By the other token, we have to be clear that we're dealing with a government that is or has decided just to smash multilateralism and multilateral mechanisms. This is a government that is acting in complete disrespect of international law. This is a government that has decided to just step back from what he himself have decided to be bound for before. I mean, this is a government that withdrew from the Paris Agreement. This is a government that now, just a couple of days ago, has decided to withdraw from the Treaty on Trade, trade arms, etc. So you mentioned, for example, the ICC. I mean, to start with, we're not a member of the ICC. We didn't sign the status of the ICC. We have questions with the ICC, and life has proven that Cuba was right when decided not to sign the status of the ICC. But for the reason of your question, what would be, the ICC just decided not to open case, just to investigate, not to judge, but to investigate, because this administration told them that if they open investigation, they would not be given visa to visit the U.S. So what is the matter of putting an issue or another to the ICC? If the ICC has proven to be subjugated, it's not independent. And that is a nation that talks by itself. Certainly we have studies and we have numbers. The whole policy of the blockade every year in the Cuban submission to the Secretary General is substantiated with figures of the cost of the blockade policy from one year to the other, and in the long run, a cumulative burden on Cuban economy. But also we have assessment of the human damage of the embargo policy, or more proper, the blockade policy. And you mentioned things with which I agree, but the Cuban blockade qualified under the Geneva Conventions as an act of genocide. Because it's to surrender the people by hunger. And that is very clearly stated in the clauses of the Geneva Convention. When you or whoever enact policies for the sole purpose of surrender a mass of people by hunger, that is genocide. And that is what the United States have been doing with the Cuban people for the last 60 years. Lester Mallory said it in his memorandum. The only way to provoke is by creating despair and hunger with the people. Thank you.
Ambassador, how are you? Jamil from Brazil. I have a number of questions as well, so bear with me. First of all, just to get the Venezuelan story out of the way, what is the, what do you fear that even though it is or looks like to be under control, do you fear that there would be a justification, for example, for a military intervention from abroad, and whether this is a danger that the region faces? This is the first question. Secondly, on your situation in Cuba, this new, not new policy, but this new level of embargo, of blockage, how does it impact your capacity, for example, to pay back the banks in Brazil on the loan you had to build your harbor, for example? And whether this loan, which I think is 200 million so far that has not been paid yet, whether you're going to pay back to the government of Bolsonaro. Thank you.
Thank you, Jamil, for your questions, and thank you also for being here this afternoon. Well, again, regarding your first question, it is not me. It has been the main the most, visible leaders of the U.S. administration who have said it, both the security advisor and the Secretary of State, the one who have said that regarding Venezuela, all the options are on the table. So if you ask me, this could be seen as a way to open the possibility for an armed aggression against Venezuela. I would answer to you, they have set up the auction. They have not renounced to any of the auctions, including the military option in Venezuela. By the way, option that is not even desired by the Lima Group. And that is very important to be noted. I think everybody upset the U.S. government is more or less aware of what would be the implication of a desperate and crazy military action in Venezuela, not only for the Venezuelan people, but for the entire region. And I think most of the countries in our region would not like to see a situation like that. Coming back to Cuba, the whole purpose, and I said it, the whole purpose of this policy is to strangle the Cuban economy. And of course, this would imply more difficulty for the Cuban economy, more difficulties than we had already. And Cuba is a very vulnerable country. Cuba is an island. Cuba is vulnerable to climate change. We just experienced a tornado that we have not seen something remotely similar in 1940, but we were affected by a tornado in Havana City. We are coming to from recovery from very hard hurricanes that affected us 2 years ago. So we are very vulnerable, not only to this sort of political move, but also to whatever climatic impediments. Cuba is an open economy for being an island, which means that we are also vulnerable to whatever normal move of ups and downs in the world economy. So if apart to that, you sum up implications from hardening blockade and hardening weather conditions, it's very obvious that this would have implications in our economy. But what we can say, and we say to our partners, is that they can rely, even if at a given moment we cannot give back, but our partners know that they are dealing with a serious government. They are dealing with a government that is committed what it signed, is committed to what it agreed, and of course, we will solve all our debts, for example, with our financiers. That was the reason that allowed us to get an agreement with the Paris Club just a couple of years ago again. Not any other thing than the seriousness of Cuba, because they know that anybody in Cuba is going to put some credit in their own pocket. We are a government who is accountable. So all what we can say is, yes, this is going to produce additional hardships for our people and government, but we have demonstrated enough that we can stand up to the situation and that we can recover from whatever, and that we are unbreakable, both in our political will to continue ahead, and also unbreakable in the commitments we agree and sign with our economic partners. Thank you.
Thank you, Bob.
Robert James Parsons. You must surely know that the reason why Trump declared a state of emergency was to be able to build the wall. And you must know that the urgency for building the wall is the decision to go ahead with the destabilization of Latin America, northern Latin America, in order to avoid an influx of refugees such as Europe has experienced. John Bolton has repeatedly described the enemy as the troika of tyranny, Venezuela, Cuba, and Nicaragua, and he has said publicly they must be eliminated. He's also said publicly, and he's sworn this last year, that the United States and its allies will be in Tehran in 2019. And these people are also talking about using a nuclear option if necessary. I mean, what is your reaction to that? Because they have colossal firepower, and these people will literally, and this has been said by people, for example, from the Rand Corporation, it's better to have a civil war in Venezuela than to have the Chinese and the Russians working with the oil there and having access to the oil. And civil war means total destabilization of the country. They're using Afghanistan and Syria as models. So how are you facing this? What are you planning for? What do you, can you help me on this?
Thank you. You're asking me a very difficult question. I would not pretend to have the response for your question. I can only try to listen. Look at what is the situation wherever the U.S. have gone, from Iraq to Syria, coming to Libya. What is the situation today? And all those were very stable countries. Countries that their people have relatively very nice, relatively, not to compare to the Western world, but relatively compared, for example, to many others, very well a standard of living. Libya was source of employment for thousands of sub-Saharan Africans who suddenly, from the day to the night, lost their employment in Libya because of the invasion of Libya. That is the source of the migration crisis that Europe is facing today. But who says that? Nobody says that. That is the source. Because those thousands of sub-Saharan Africans that used to work in refineries and petrochemicals in Libya, they also kept their families back home with remittances. So all these people lost their income from the day to the night. What do you expect? They just go to cross the Mediterranean. The same is happening in our region, which, by the way, they talk about the Venezuelans, but they don't talk about the others. The ones trying to reach the Mexican border are not the Venezuelans, are the others. The wall is built not for the Venezuelan so-called refugees running away from desperate and, it's done for the others, but they don't mention the others. They have produced this thousands of kilometers away, but we're talking about a region that is just divided by a border. This administration is widely known for being unreasonable I mean, you don't know when you're dealing with irreasonable people, people who are unpredictable because they don't act based on common and rational things, even from the conservative side. And we have dealt with 11 administrations already, so we have seen everything in the political spectrum. But regarding this administration, I think they are beyond that. Bolton, this was the person who accused Cuba some years back of producing biological weapons. What's Bolton? So these are people who are a little bit out of their mind. I will leave it to the American people. I still believe that most of the American people would like to live in a world that is peaceful. I think most of the American people, and we have seen it in the case of Cuba, are in favor of normal relationship with Cuba. We could send them when we started to make progress with the Obama administrations, since we decided both to reopen embassies, to reestablish diplomatic relationship. They start coming under, not as tourists, as I said it before, but under the 12 different categories by thousands to Cuba. There is no, animosity in the Cuban people towards the American people for the sake, we are very clear that it has been the government, not the people. So I very much believe that the majority, wide majority of the American people would like to see, a friendly relationship with its immediate neighbor, which is Latin America and the Caribbean countries. I resist myself to believe that the American people would support a crazy action by their government in what they consider to be their backyard. So I still believe that most of the American people would be in support or would be opposed to a military intervention either in Cuba or Venezuela or Nicaragua or anything that by extension would have very damaging implications also for the American people, because an intervention in Venezuela would have ramifications all along in our region, and that would impact one way or the other. And you had Vietnam, thousands of kilometers away. It was the American people who said enough is enough when the coffins start coming back home. So I really believe, and I'm really confident on that. I have to be optimistic. There is no way that, because otherwise we are lost in this way. We have to keep confidence that there is still reason in this world. Thank you.
Thank you. Maybe if the... Okay, question, oui, monsieur. D'accord. Non, attends, derrière. Ouais.
C'est chaque fois pareil, si je veux parler.
C'est bon.
Sorry. Embajador, ¿ha recibido usted instrucciones para estudiar o iniciar acciones contra Estados Unidos en la OMC?
No tengo instrucciones hasta hoy.
Bueno,
me ha preguntado en la OMC.
No, para estudiar.
We always study. We always studied to be prepared just in case. But I have not received instructions. But I studied, and Fidel touches that the only way to win the war is to be prepared for the war. So we have to be prepared. We always study all the possibilities, all scenarios.
Ok. Oui, une question. Oh. Vas-y.
No, I only wanted to add something about Libya. Gaddafi was giving money to refugees, and like this, they wouldn't come to Europe, you know. They would either stay in Libya, or some would go back, but on their own if they decided so, and, or get a job after some time in Libya. It was, of course, most sub-Saharians, the refugees, but they all got money. It's known at UN, I guess. At least I'm sure of that.
A last question. Not very short, very short. Alfred. Yes, and after.
The new Mexican President López Obrador has made very concrete and positive proposals with regard to the Montevideo mechanism for a solution, a political solution, a negotiated solution of the Venezuelan crisis. Has Cuba approached López Obrador in order to do something similar with regard to the sanctions against Cuba and with regard to the bloqueo, and now because of Title III of the Helms-Burton Law?
Thank you. I really don't know. I mean, all what I know is that we have supported the Montevideo initiative to break a peaceful and negotiated solution to the situation in Venezuela. Cuba has very much supported that and continue to support that as the only viable way to look at the issue in Venezuela. Thank you.
Last, dernière question, yeah, monsieur. Oui, appuyez, voilà.
Muy buenas tardes, señor embajador. Yo soy un viejo militante de la Revolución Cubana. Yo soy indígena y represento a Tupac Amaru ante las Naciones Unidas. Nosotros habíamos recibido al primer embajador de Cuba en Bolivia, los mineros en Potosí, en la juventud del Partido Comunista, donde estuve, recibimos al primer embajador de Cuba del 59. Y desde entonces, Tupac Amaru, y yo personalmente, estoy implicado en la lucha en defensa de la Revolución Cubana. Tantos años hemos luchado con Chachi, Rodolfo, y no hemos conseguido mucho. Pero en 2014 y 2015 se estableció o se restableció las relaciones diplomáticas en Cuba. Y me dijeron los camaradas cubanos, me dijeron en La Habana de que probablemente el conflicto con Estados Unidos estaba resuelto. A estas alturas confrontamos de nuevo a los ataques del imperialismo y del presidente Trump. Eso nos deja pensar que el imperialismo no puede claudicar. Tiene que agredir a los pueblos hasta su última suspiro. el imperialismo no puede caer fácilmente. Ahora, en cuanto a los instrumentos internacionales, que el profesor los instrumentos internacionales están caducos. El Consejo de Derechos Humanos ya no sirve para nada. Y no hay instrumento que pueda resolver el problema de Cuba y de Venezuela. No. Yo hablo también estoy le preguntando también para nuestro periódico Ancla Rouge. Yo publico en ese periódico la cuestión política de Cuba y Venezuela. En Venezuela, nuestra posición, la posición de Tupac Amaru, que se inspira de la revolución bolchevique, de la línea marxista, era en Venezuela el poder estaba en las calles. Era necesario tomar el poder político en las calles. No, el poder político no se negocia, se toma por la fuerza y se aplica contra el enemigo de clase. Estamos hablando de clases y la lucha de clases. Es lo que vale, el resto no vale nada. Señor...
Okay. ¿Puedo poner su pregunta porque no tenemos tiempo para declaraciones?
¿Qué piensa, señor embajador, sobre la situación de Venezuela, que ha traído tantas llanto y lágrimas, la situación en Venezuela? En su opinión, ¿cuál es la opinión de Cuba? ¿Cuál sería la solución para tomar el poder político y cambiar y luchar contra la burguesía que está al lado del imperialismo yanqui? Muchas gracias.
No, gracias. Gracias por la pregunta y los comentarios. Yo creo que eso, digo, lo tendría que decidir el pueblo venezolano. O sea, yo no puedo decir eso. O sea, eso lo tiene que decidir el pueblo venezolano, y creo que el pueblo venezolano ha estado en respaldo del gobierno legítimo. Yo lo que puedo decir es que la única solución desde nuestro punto de vista es por el camino de la negociación, tal como lo han estado promoviendo los gobiernos de México y el gobierno de Uruguay, en la iniciativa de Montevideo, que es la iniciativa que nosotros respaldamos y que muchos de los gobiernos de la región y de otras regiones del mundo, incluidos gobiernos europeos, respaldan, porque están conscientes de que no hay una salida violenta a la situación en Venezuela, sino una salida pacífica, con la participación de todas las partes involucradas. Gracias.
Muchas gracias. I think now we have to conclude this press meeting. I would like to thank again Mr. Ambassador for his statement and his answers to your questions. So thank you to everybody of you and wish you all the best.
Muchas gracias a todos por su